So this person that was trading messages with was talking about the Pocahontas, the oldest black community, being being slaves, and they weren't indigenous. And then, you know, rather than go back and forth, I'm gonna make this video and hopefully everybody else can learn something. All right. Now Pocahontas was Chief Powhatan's daughter, right? Now this is a letter written by that man, John Smith, in 1608 about Powhatan, and he says, Powhatan, more like a devil than a man, with some 200 more as black as himself. All right. And that is why, back closer to that time period, they depicted him like this, because he was a big black man, right? And then even today, and at the Virginia Historical Society in Richmond, Virginia, they have this depiction of Powhatan. I know that they have changed the plaque and they may be calling him a tobacco Indian, but because I actually know a Powhatan member that made it clear this was actually Chief Powhatan that he was trying to depict. Now, when you look at this, it's very clear who he is and what type of person he is, what kind of man this was. All right. It's kind of hard to have that father and not yourself also be what you would consider a black person today. Indians were always considered black. Now, this is a picture of Pocahontas that actually sits in at the Capitol, in the rotunda at the Capitol. And before you start trying to say I'm lying and I'm making it up, here's a government site from the architect at the Capitol that shows the picture. And in this, if you were to look this up, they tell you that they actually have retouched it and repainted it. So my guess is it probably was a lot darker and then they lightened her up, but she's still in the late or the early 1800s was still being depicted as a brown, or who today you may call a black person. So let's talk about the name Powhatan. So, okay, first of all, this is a um, maize god scenery, and maize god meaning the corn god of the Maya. All right. But this darker fellow over here, that is also an aged deity named Powhatan. And it's estimated to be between 600 and 800 AD. I say estimated because these people don't always have accurate dating for various reasons. But let's just take a look at that scene. And this is the scene of the maize god reemerging. All right. So, yes, the corn god, the deity. But anyway, let's read this. At the center of this plate, the maize god dances as he reemerges from the watery underworld. He stands atop a skull from which fire and water lilies spring forth, making his appearance as potent regenerative event, one analogous to the epiphysis of Maya kings. Powhatan, an aged deity holding his characteristic shell, sits to the right of the maize god and points downward at the place from which the maize god emerges. So, it's kind of interesting because this is Powhatan, and of course, we know that there's Powhatan up in Virginia. That's where John Smith fought with, that's Pocahontas' father, right? One of the first people I heard break down this, commonality was Dr. Ali. And so, you know what? So, Dr. Ali, please break it down a little bit, and I'll come back and say a few more words after that.
The word Powhatan is a glyph in the She language, so-called Mayan. It shows up in Virginia, and there's a chief named Powhatan. And there's a ceremony. When you say powwow, it's really from powwow. Powwow is a ceremony. It's the solstice and equinox ceremony. It's not the name of the tribe. And Powhatan is a glyph. Powhatan is a glyph that symbolizes the 4 cardinal points of the year. Powhatan. 4 stones. And those 4 stones represent the winter solstice and the summer solstice, the spring and the fall equinox. It represents calendar keeping, and it gets very advanced. And the word Powhatan is allegedly Mayan. And Powhatan first shows up as a glyph in their, check this out, in their linguistic system. And if Powhatan shows up in their linguistic system, in Mexico, what we now know as Mexico, tell me how the hell the word got to Virginia. Tell me how Powhatan, whose first encounter with Europeans, said he had approximately 200 other Indians with him who are as black as the devil. That's their description of him. Powhatan, the chief, with 200 other Indians with him who are black as the devil. Where are those black as the devil Indians right now? They are damn sure not on any reservations. They're not on any reservations. So we have the name Powhatan coming from Mexico.
Real quick, I'm going to read what else I found out about Powhatan. Powhatan, God in. Powhatan is God in of the Shelas classification, currently known to have 4 aspects. He has been connected to an earth god known as Mem, described as a god, still being worshipped today. Appearance. Drawn as an old man with missing teeth, images depict Powhatan with a turtle shell or a conch shell on his back. He also wears a headdress. Most sources this author has found say it is netted headdress, though the ancient Maya New Perspective states that it is crocodile headdress. The god is also commonly drawn with one hand raised above his head, and is drawn either as a scribe or teaching scribes. In a few classic period images on the ceramics, Powhatan is drawn with a accompaniment of a woman. Functions. Powhatan was the patron of scribes and the group of 5 unlucky days known as the Wayeb, which came at the end of the Hab calendar. The 4 aspects of Powhatan, called Bakabs, each were thought to stand at one of the 4 main compass points and hold up the sky. Each Bakab was connected to a color as well, like the aspects of Chak, God be. Wayab dance. Powhatan may be connected to a dance known as Wayab dance, a scene in the lower temple of jaguars at Chichen Itza, depicts a ruler and ritual participants taking part in a dance, with Powhatan being a notable figure. It is conjectured that this dance may have taken place during the Wayab consideration. Sources conflict concerning Powhatan's name. The ancient Maya states that Powhatan was known as Bakab during the post-classic period, while Handbook to Life in the ancient Maya world states that it is Powhatan's 4 aspects that are known as Bakabs. A third source, the ancient Maya New Perspective, states that Powhatan, at the time of contact with the Spanish, was known as the 4 Bakabs. So I'm going to say this real quick. Like, for instance, look at this statue of Powhatan. You notice how they chipped away his nose? Well, whose noses do they always try to chip away, right? But let me say more about this. There is definitely a connection between the people that they are calling Maya today, because even though that's not their name, just like the Olmec's name was not Olmec either, there's a connection between them, and especially people on the east coast of the United States area. And we know they came up here for some of their Maya blue dye, and that was found in the Georgia mountains, along with other things that you could find on this coastline that the Mayas had that wasn't from their area. Okay, and we know at the same token, like with the Olmec, or the people that they call the Olmec, we know their direct lineage with the mound builders, the Mississippian culture. They know this, they've known this, and now we're starting to learn it. And through all of that, there's no reason for us to really be arguing with people who want to say, these aren't your people, y'all don't, because it's obvious that the people who are claiming these people today are not the same people. I mean, we don't really have to argue with anyone about that. Now, I'm going to show y'all this, but I want to make a quick statement about this, all right? When you look at this, it is not very detailed. They don't actually tell you where these ships came from. And Also, I'd like to mention that it could have very easily have been Caucasians on these ships. But what we do know from real records that they were bringing people, when they were bringing people from other places, they were bringing them from the West Indies mostly. But okay, here's the database. Let's take a look at this. And this is this year's, this is from this year. I just did this a couple of days ago. But, and now they're saying 366,872. Now that number actually went up since last year. And you know what? Actually, let me show you what last year's looked like. Now this is the one from last year. And last year, let's see, I'm gonna scroll on down here. The number was 366 and 33. So it went up like almost 800. But like I said before, it's not very detailed when you're trying to get to the information. All right. And these other numbers are also very questionable. That 5 million in the Caribbean, the Spanish mainland. Now, see, Mexico is part of North America. So that 366 should count into Mexico and also Canada, y'all. Brazil is in question because that's where Negro de Terra is from. You know, when they tell you that they took people from Africa and put them in Africa, what does that tell you? All right. But the total is 10 million something, something, right? Now, when we was growing up, they always told us 100 million Africans. Then the number came down. And then even now, people still misquote that number. Now, this man, a professor at Brown University, Mr. Linford D. Fisher, he wrote an article about this subject, all right? The article's called Colonial Enslavement of Native Americans, included those who surrendered too. And in this particular article, you can look up and read the whole article for yourself. But in this particular article, he had a quote. Let's see here, and the quote was, "Native American slavery is a piece of history of slavery that has been glossed over. Between 1492 and 1880, between 2 and 5.5 million Native Americans were enslaved in the Americas, in addition to 12.5 million African slaves." Now, that 12.5 million African slaves is already inaccurate. And I want to say it's probably not even as high as that. Like I originally stated, that there were way more Indians being enslaved in the Americas than there were ever Africans, okay? The whole story of Africans coming here is not totally out, but the numbers are way off. Now, here's an article from Matthew Wills from back in 2018 on this other collegiate site, and it was talking about when Native Americans became slaves. Now, they're talking about the Pequot Wars and a specific thing. Now, let's just read this. It says, "The English came to the New World proud of their conception of liberty. Historian Michael Guasco writes that the settlers claimed their antipathy for slavery contrasted them from the rest of the world, especially their colonial competitor, Spain, already infamous for working Native Americans to death. Yet, after the Pequot War of 1637, Puritans captured Pequots to bondage in a small Puritan community on the coast of Nicaragua called Providence Island." So right here is when you really need to pay attention, because this is showing you or giving you a little insight into what they actually did when they warred with Indian tribes, the ones that weren't killed but were captured. What they did, they shipped them to different places. All right. And this was happening all across the Americas, but this specifically was talking about in the United States territory. Right. So let's continue. There, they were called cannibal Negroes to distinguish them from the native mosquitoes with whom the Puritans wished to maintain good relations. Guasco calls this Anglo America's first true slave society. All right, now see, that is important because, like I just showed you and told you, they were shipping captured Indians to other places. And when they got to wherever they were going, they were now termed as Negroes. In this case, they called them cannibal Negroes. And this is the Pequots. All right. The Pequot Indians were very much melanated Indians. They didn't just ship them to the Caribbean or down to almost South America. They also shipped them back in to the United States territory. And we're going to talk about that too. But watch this first, all right? This is a book that was written by a man named Andres Resendez called The Other Slavery. And he's talking about the Carolinas and what they did, the exact same method when they warred with the Indians, all right? And the title is Native Americans Were Enslaved, Then Exported, all right? Now, this is exactly what we was just talking about. By the way, these quotes that I'm about to express came from the University of North Carolina, all right? But here's what one of the quotes says. Native Americans were involved in the slaving enterprise from the beginning of European colonization. At first, they offered captives to the newcomers and helped them develop new networks of enslavement. As Indians acquired European weapons and horses, they increased their power and came to control an ever larger share of the traffic in slaves. So, see, what they're telling you is the majority of the larger scale of the traffic of slaves were Indian, captured, prisoners of war, all right? And they were trading with these Europeans for weapons and horses. This is what he's saying, all right? Now, let's keep it going. The next quote is it says, in the Carolinas, colonists took tens of thousands of Indian slaves and shipped many of them to the Caribbean. In the period between 1670 and 1720, Carolinians exported more Indians out of Charleston than they imported Africans into it. All right. So, in this particular article, they're telling you, or it's an article about a passage in a book. These are quotes out of a book that were in the University of North Carolina that's telling you between 1670 and 1720, they exported more Indians than they imported Africans. So when you shipped these people, these Indians, guess what they were being called on the other side? They were being called Negroes. They were no longer being called Indians. So let's go to this Indian slavery in the Carolina region. And this is in Chicago General or Chicago University, the University of Chicago or whatever. But let's see what they say in this one. All right. It starts with Indian slavery in the Carolina region. Although known to the specialists, the presence and extent of Indian slavery in colonial times has, except for a recent thesis by Lauber, received but little attention, and except as brief reports are found scattered throughout early records, letters, and travelers' descriptions, the present investigation represents a collection of such material as was available concerning Indian slavery in the Carolina region. Comment has been reduced to the minimum. Okay, so they're telling you they shrunk down all of everything that's been said. But anyway, let's keep going. It says, from the early records which are available, it is evident that Indian slavery was no insignificant factor in the colonial period of Carolina. It was recognized in the concessions of 1665 and in the fundamental constitutions. The Carolinas were preeminent in the use of exploitation of Indian slaves, although North Carolina appears to have been somewhat laggard second to South Carolina in this respect. The ready supply of Indians helped to meet the pressing need of the colonists for laborers, and England offer a ready market for the surplus. So what is that telling us, y'all? After everything we just read, we read earlier that in New England, they were shipping Pequots out into the Caribbean and wherever else, probably down into the Carolinas, and probably being called Negroes, never Africans, Negroes, right? And at the same time, simultaneously, South Carolina was shipping out a bunch of Indians and they were sending up north as well as into the Caribbean. Okay? So this whole story about slavery has been a lie.